Okay, I don't know how long this video is going to last because of my voice again. Seems like this particular winter has been kind of hard on my sinuses and my voice and everything else. But we got record-breaking low temperatures and all the other good stuff that comes at the end of February. It seems like right around the end of the winter time when February hits, it's almost like wintertime just really wants us to give us hell on earth one last time before it leaves. It's like that unruly guest that you kick out of a social setting, and they say, well, fine, I'll leave. And on the way out, they decide to destroy everything and maybe break a window on the way out. I think that's what wintertime's doing to us here. I didn't get an opportunity to do one of these last week because I've just been busy, but there is a particular subscriber that has a long list of books that he's recommended that I pick up. And I do take the book recommendations and the article recommendations I get from many people on here quite seriously. It's just when you don't have as much spare time on your hands as I would like, as I would like to have, until I can pay down a few debts here and there where I could get some more spare time on my hands. I having to work all the time, but I do actually take that very seriously, and I do have lists and everything saved on the computer. And I'm waiting for one to arrive in the mail right now called the U.S. of AA, How Alcoholics Anonymous Hijacked the Addiction Industry, or I guess you could say the treatment center industry, or I don't remember the full title. There's no use in me pretending I do. But just based on some of the sample reads I was going through, it does look like a very intriguing read. And I think one of the reasons I ordered a hardback copy of it is because, I've read plenty of things from the Armory Papers on these videos over the years, and I've read a few other things, but I thought it might not be, it might actually be beneficial if I had some literature that's not just the AA cult literature that I go around debunking on here most of the time, but if I actually had, some other sources of information I could share with everybody on here. So I might want to read some of that when I finally get it and I dive into it. But I was searching online a little bit about it in depth, and I came across a few Reddits where people were talking about the corruption that runs rampant in AA, how AA makes quite a lot of money, and a lot of people don't realize how deeply tied up it is in the treatment center industry. And a lot of people don't even mention the rehab. Outside of the rehab industry, a lot of people don't even seem to talk too much about the drug courts, and the halfway house scams, and a whole lot of other nefarious ways that this organization sustains itself through not quite so honest resources, I guess you could say. And the one disconcerting thing I did find coming from a lot of people where they were saying, well, Bill W. never intended for it to be this way. Bill W. was a good man. Bill W. was really honestly and sincerely trying to help people. And no, that's not true. That's not true at all. I've sourced several articles and material on here on this channel numerous times about what kind of a con artist, a hack, a grifter, and a mentally unhinged lunatic he was, that really seemed to thrive on the idea of having a religious cult under his command, that caused him and his buddy Tom Powers to split up in the later years when they told him to write the 12 and 12, and he was saying, well, I'll write the 12 and 12 if you'll just let me get out of this organization altogether. And they said he would come in and he would hunch over on the typewriter and cry, and it got on their nerves so badly that they all but forced him to get out of it. But if you look deep down into his life, no, not a good, sincere, honest guy that was trying to help people. That's bullshit. And it leads to a broader thing that I kind of wanted to talk about when I started making this video, which is it never ceases to amaze me. And it can be incredibly frustrating, or it can be incredibly infuriating, or sometimes it's both at the same time. The amount of mental gymnastics, and the amount of bending over backwards, and the amount of logical fallacies, and the amount of dishonesty that I encounter all the time, not just me as a person, but what I see online in forums and things like that people will bend over to in order to defend this malignant, nefarious religious cult that AA is. It even irritates me when people say, there's not a whole lot of evidence in support of AA. There's zero evidence in support of AA when you consider the fact that AA thrives on something that it cannot prove and cannot demonstrate. You can't demonstrate that a spiritual experience exists. You can't demonstrate that a spiritual experience, which you have zero proof for, does anything for anybody. You can't demonstrate that there is a higher power that's going to punish you with drunkenness for not doing a four-step. It's founded in utterly baseless assertions with no concrete realities to back it up whatsoever. So it's kind of hard to gather evidence about something that's basically just made up faith healing. But it kills me the amount of leniency that people are willing to give something like this, because if you had a fraudulent faith healer that was claiming that he was just going to put his hand on your head and he was going to heal you like one of those TV evangelist kinds of guys. There was one in particular I was trying to think of, but I can't think of his name off the top of my head. But, if you were having a night where you couldn't sleep and you turned the TV on because you had insomnia and you saw this guy doing a prayer and he put his hand on someone's head and they would fall over backwards and the crowd would all be, arms in the air waving around for the tent revival organ thing playing. Nobody in society outside of the people who are manipulated and brainwashed into following that would give anything like that any kind of real credence in the real world whatsoever. They would very rightfully and very without any, I guess you could say without any hesitancy, they would come forward and say, look, this looks fraudulent. There's no proof of this. There's no proof of anything behind this happening outside of maybe a fabricated placebo effect. But because it's AA and because it's an institution that's wormed its way into pop culture and wormed its way into our society, people are willing to give it all kinds of passes that they would not give to any other pseudo-fake religious movement. Nobody really in the critical realm of things gives a ridiculous religion like Scientology with its ideas about an eternal soul that reincarnates over and over again, and whatever it is that practices they do. I forgot the name of it now, where they ask you a whole bunch of questions. I can't remember it. And I just was reading about it the other day. But anyway, nobody takes any of that really seriously in the public spectrum. I mean, it's pretty much common knowledge that outside of the fact it cozied up to Hollywood celebrities and it makes a lot of money that way, I don't really see too many articles that give it any kind of credence, because it is going towards unproven, unfounded assertions. You can't prove that someone's difficulties in this life is because of difficulties they had as a reincarnated alien soul in another galaxy or some shit like that. But when it comes to AA, they all do the same thing. Well, it helps some people. There's people with good intentions in AA. Yeah, it might not have any. No, it's faith healing. It's a faith healing cult that tells you have to surrender your will and your life over to the care of some made up higher power, which they tell you what it is and they dictate to you how it is. And there's no evidence for any of this. It's all baseless assertions and made up stuff. And if it wasn't for the fact that AA was an institution, nobody would take it with any more seriousness than they would any other fraudulent type of fake, phony bullshit that you read about or see with these people that con and manipulate people out of their money. And it's really funny to me how certain AA defenders will try to lie and manipulate their way around it and say, well, AA is not about making money, or something like that, when yes, it actually is. A lot of these so-called research institutes that have weaved their way into the government and did so at the behest of somebody like Marty Mann, are very much interested in keeping themselves alive and in funding and everything else. Just because you got some chronically broke gurus who doesn't seem to want anything out of life other than sitting around in meetings, taking cigarettes from people, borrowing money from their sponsees and stealing out of the collection basket, does not make AA a poverty-ridden organization that's barely functioning and operating in some church basement somewhere. But they'll give it a pass for this. It may not really be that effective, but there's some evidence that it might do it. No, it's just like the mental gymnastics I see people bending to, trying to lie and manipulate or just outright engage in utter ludicrous ways to try to excuse away or defend the toxic culture that exists within AA, or try to excuse away its massive failure rate by, putting the onus and the blame on the people who it fails, rather than looking at the fact the program itself is a failure. And sometimes they're just outright lies and manipulation I've seen people engage in to try to justify the reason for this cult existing. It's time to take away this special, protected, privileged status that AA enjoys, and it's time to start treating it like the phony bunk solution that it is, because it's no solution at all. It's no different than people saying that the reason people drink is because their reincarnated alien soul that has gone through multiple transformations and multiple lives, like the Church of Scientology says, is the reason why they have a drinking problem. Believe it or not, the evidence in favor of what AA preaches and the evidence in favor of what Scientology or Mormonism or any of the rest of the newer religions preach is about the same, which means zero evidence at all. And there's no point in taking an organization that has failed the public on a very large and massive scale, which had dishonesty at its roots from the very, very beginning, when Bill W. and Bob, who were both Oxford Group members, put this thing together. Although they didn't really put this thing together, because they were both Oxford Group members at the time that it kind of came into being. Whether that was because Frank Buckman just couldn't deal with them, or whether it was because they were too egocentric to be humble rank-and-file members of the Oxford Group, kind of remains to be seen. But it's really time to take the gloves off and stop mollycoddling this thing as any kind of acceptable alternative or solution for anything. The only people who go around talking about how wonderful this thing has been for them need to just actually understand that that is not conclusive evidence for the thing being wonderful. Something that has a 95% failure rate that you say has made you happy, that you say has saved your life, flies in the face of evidence. And if truth is going to be subjective, whoa, hey, saved my life and that's all I care about, then you're going to treat all matters of truth as something that's up to the individual to decide. And if you're going to do that, then everybody who's been harmed by AA has a valid offer as well. Except the fact is, when it comes to evidence and when it comes to truth and evidence are not subjective and open to interpretation. Hard data is hard data. And when the data shows a 95% failure rate, the data weighs heavily in favor of the fact that AA doesn't even provide a good phony placebo effect for the people who adhere to it. And I think my voice is starting to give out now, because I didn't have what I was wanting to talk about really in front of me for this video, but I did want to give a quick update out there that I'm still alive and still functioning, even though you hadn't heard from me in a couple of weeks. But really and truly, I guess that's the overall message that I wanted to put out this week. Stop giving AA any kind of privileged status. Stop treating it as any kind of viable alternative. Stop making excuses for it by saying, well, if it makes some people happy, it's a good organization. If it makes some people happy, it still fails 95% of the people who enter into its rooms. Something to think about. Next time.